Hi, I'm Ryan Cummings. I'm the owner of the R&R Law Group, a criminal defense firm here in Scottsdale, Arizona. And today we're talking about jury trials. Jury trials are a guarantee in Arizona for all felony offenses and a few misdemeanor offenses, the most common being reckless driving and DUIs. And a lot of people think about jury trials and they think, oh, I'm going to go in and I'm going to pick my jury. And that's really not how it happens here in Arizona. We have a process in which you pick a jury, and it really goes in a random order. So, for instance, the last jury trial I had, we randomly selected 30 people. And those people then were put in random order from 1 through 30. Now, there's a process called voir dire, and that is you're asking questions of the jury. The first formal questions are mostly just to ensure that they qualify as a juror. So in order to qualify as a juror, you have to live within the jurisdiction that you're hearing the case. And what that means is, let's say it's happening in Maricopa County. Well, then you just have to be a resident of Maricopa County. But let's say that it's a trial that's happening in Scottsdale, but you don't live within the city of Scottsdale. Well, then you wouldn't be qualified to hear that trial that's happening in Scottsdale. The other one is, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And are you a U.S. citizen? Those are the questions that are asked to make sure that you qualify to be able to be on a jury. If you had been convicted of a felony, it asks if you've had your rights restored, because you can get your rights restored and then later serve as a juror. So those are some of the basic questions that get asked of jurors in order to determine, can they even get to the next step. Once they pass that, then we ask a long list of questions about your job, what you do, if you've had any prior training as in law or legal training, what your spouse's occupation is, whether or not you've ever been a victim of a crime, whether or not you've been charged with a crime. And really a lot of those questions are just to determine whether or not a juror has a bias or would lean one way or the other and couldn't be fair and impartial. And that's really what we want to get to with our juries, because we want to make sure that any juror that we have is willing to listen to the evidence and the testimony and make their verdict based upon what they hear, and not something that they may be thinking about that happened to them 5 years ago. So once we get through that voir dire process, the attorneys can have a strike for cause, or they can motion the court to strike a juror for cause. So let's just say that a prospective juror said, I hate law enforcement and I don't believe anything they say. Okay, well, the prosecutor then is going to try and strike that person for cause, meaning they're going to say that that person has a bias against law enforcement that they have deemed that they can't put aside, and therefore that juror should not be allowed on our jury. In reverse of that, if we get a juror that says, I believe everything that law enforcement did, and if they arrested somebody, then that person has to be guilty. Well, now I'm going to be asking to strike that juror for cause because that person has a bias against my client and already has presumed them guilty just because an officer has charged them with a crime, which you cannot do in Arizona. That just because you're charged with a crime, that is not evidence that a person actually did that crime. Now, as we move through those phases, we're lined up 1 to 30. Depending upon what type of jury it is, maybe you need a jury of 8. Okay, it's a felony. It can't be punished by more than 25 years, so you get a jury of 8. You'll probably ask for 2 alternates just to be safe. So now you're looking for 10. So presumably jurors 1 through 10 are our jury. What happens then is if we struck number 2 for cause and number 8 for cause and number 9 for cause, well, we need to replace 3 of those 10 jurors. So now jurors 11, 12, and 13 are our new jury. Now, this might be helpful for you if you're ever on jury selection and you look down at your number and you're pretty high up in that jury selection. Now you know as far as your panel goes, you may have a pretty strong likelihood that you're not going to be put on that jury. If you look down and your number's number 3, you're probably going to be on that jury. Now, the only other thing that's changed over the years is when COVID hit back in 2019, 2020, what happened then is a Supreme Court order in Arizona came out and said, we are losing what are called our peremptory challenges. So it used to be that after we got through the jury selection and all of the jurors that were struck for cause were out, it used to be that the state and defense and us, we got to say, hey, I'm going to excuse this juror. And then the state would pick and say, I'm going to excuse this juror. And that would go back and forth until we ended our peremptory challenges. And then we would be left with our jury. So if I had a juror on there that maybe they made a few statements that made me sound like, well, they kind of lean more towards believing police officers. Now, they said they were fair and impartial, so I couldn't strike them for cause, but they maybe lean more towards believing the state without any evidence being presented. I could have just said, well, I'm going to kick that one off. I don't want that person to be part of my jury. We don't get that anymore, and the reason from that was, we wanted a smaller jury pool, and if we were able to kick out 10 jurors just on our own, we would need to call more jurors into the room in order to go through that jury selection process. So that's really a breakdown of how our jury selection works in Arizona. If you have questions, you find yourself on the other side of a charge, give us a call. We're here to help.